do attendance and introduce ourselves first. So I've been elected by my peers to chair, and I'm County Councillor Lisa Dimmock for the Elms Ward, ND.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny Manager.
Francis Taylor.
Councillor Jamie Jahan, member of this committee.
Good morning, Richard Roden, Dixon with Osbaston, member of this committee. Thank you.
Associate officers as well. Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance.
Good morning, I'm Officer Sharon Lloyd. I'm the Communities Partnerships Manager for Monmouthshire Council.
Thank you. And do we have any apologies?
Yes, we do, Chair. Councillor Pavia.
We do have 2 members joining us, but they are, a meeting is overrun. Is there any declarations of interest? Okay, lovely. There's no members of the public. So I'm going to move to item 6 because our visitors are not here yet. So 6, scrutiny of regional partnership boards, to consider any future scrutiny of the work of regional partnership boards, possibly in conjunction with other local authorities. The background paper is being provided to us as well. Hazel sent that out yesterday. Do you just want to say something?
Yes, you'll be aware that we've sent a background paper to you prepared by Robert McGowan, our Policy and Scrutiny Officer, on the role and work of RPBs. This subject has been raised to us by Caerphilly Council, who have asked us whether we would be interested in considering joint scrutiny of RPB. Up to this point, there has been no scrutiny of the work of RPBs. We regularly talk about integrated care fund monies in our Adult Select Committee, but we don't have any oversight or accountability for that sort of work stream. So we've sent you a detailed sort of report on the background of RPBs and the work, and we've had also 2 letters, one from Caerphilly Council asking us whether we would be interested in joint scrutiny of this, and also a copy of their letter to the Minister Vaughan Gethin, reiterating their concerns about the lack of accountability over this arrangement. So that's just a bit of context, members, and I'd take your thoughts on whether this is something that you feel we should be scrutinising, and if so, I think it should fit under the remit of this new Public Services Select Committee, with our wider responsibilities to scrutinise collaborative service provision. Okay.
So do any members have any comments they wish to make? Or are we happy with the joint? Yes, go on.
Thank you, Chair. Currently, there is inadequate scrutiny of the RPB, and this needs to be changed. It needs to be brought before us in a form that we can scrutinise. So I support moving to a position where we can co-scrutinise with other PSBs. Thank you.
Sir Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. I think that absolutely I would support the... we talk in particular, you know, we've talked at Adult Select previously about the Intermediate Care Fund as Hazel sets out, but at the moment it would seem, so according to the report, roughly £50 million has been available in Gwent. It would be helpful if we could just set out for members. So currently, you know, how is that scrutinised, or is it, because I know that, well, I think that it is the case that that funding will come in and it will be distributed then by the Health Board. It comes into the Health Board, I think that's correct, Hazel can clarify, and then it's distributed to the delivery bodies across Gwent. But I'm not sure then if there is any other oversight other than that provided by the Regional Partnership Board at the present time. that's my first question. And the second one, it does say in here that there is about around 1% top sliced for management and coordination and oversight. It would be helpful to understand currently how that is, what function that is playing, and what sight this council has of that management and oversight function.
So Hazel, what will be the next steps now? Obviously, we'll respond back to Councillor Lyndon Biden, and agree that we're happy to do a joint scrutiny with him. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Councillor Trahan.
It says in the report that the RPBs must provide five bullet points that they need to provide: a population needs assessment, an area plan, an annual report, integrated market position statement, and establish pooled funds for care homes and family support members. Can I ask if we can have a copy of those when we scrutinise it next? And also where all the funding goes as well, and the breakdown of that as well would be helpful.
We will arrange that to be distributed out. Okay. Can I say something? Yeah.
Just to let members know, we have scrutinised in the past the population needs assessment and also the area plan through some of our other select committees. But I think Caerphilly has invited them to go into their council and actually present a detailed kind of scrutiny of the things that you've just mentioned. So perhaps in the meantime, whilst we support the idea of some joint scrutiny, perhaps we could ask them to come in to a future meeting of this select committee to present the information that presented to Caerphilly. I didn't put that on the agenda today because it was quite detailed, and without the partners in front of you to discuss it with you, it probably would have raised more questions than given you answers. But if there's a desire to move forward with joint scrutiny, I'll certainly progress that with Caerphilly. And in the meantime, I think it's timely that actually we do start asking some questions around this, and we can invite them in the meantime to talk to us. And perhaps they'll also see the value of joint scrutiny, having been invited to multiple councils.
Okay, we'll go straight on to 7 minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of July. Has anyone got any comments on that? Oh, 2019. Who was that then? What do we do now? Roden, Trahan, yeah, Batruni. Are you happy with those minutes, both of you? Yeah.
Happy to approve.
Yes, thank you. And then 8, consider select committee's forward work programme.
Given that this is a new committee, myself and some of the officers have sat down and thought about how we could take this in a different direction, because I'm aware that just scrutinising the work of the PSB can be quite dry in terms of discussing delivery plans and actions, but not necessarily services that you would relate to directly on the ground. So we've thought about different sort of work streams for this committee, and certainly the work around the RPBs would be a suggested one. There's also the possibility to look at shared resource service, SRS. There's also really the opportunity for you to consider calling in partners who receive public monies and the precept. So that might give you some sort of thoughts around the breadth that this committee's new terms of reference could apply to. It's any sort of services that we sort of deliver jointly or collaboratively with others that doesn't neatly fall within the remit of other selects, or is to such a degree cross-cutting enough that actually it would merit being placed here where we have all of the select chairs on this committee. And that then enables you to consider, like in this instance, with the VAUDAV's work, you might look to choose to focus on certain aspects within your individual select committees, but that sort of gives you the platform to do that here and have that oversight with all of the chairs on this group. So does anybody have any thoughts about things that they might like to scrutinise in future via this committee?
Can I just clarify one question about you mentioned the precept, Hazel. So when you say organisations in receipt of the precept, I note in your notes you've referred to, I think, to the Police and Crime Commissioner, for example. We collect the precept on their behalf. You know, they raise the precept, but that's almost the same as kind of our town and community council, so we just simply collect it on their behalf. So I was just a bit unsure about that, you know, relationship there, because whilst we collect the precept on their behalf, and clearly, for example, the Police and Crime Commissioner is providing services, not just policing, but other criminal justice services across Gwent, using the precept, but we don't give, you know, we're not providing them with public monies, if you like. So I was just slightly confused about that. It would be really helpful if you could clarify.
I think this is quite a sort of grey area, and it's new sort of ground for the committee. I'd like to ask Matt to give us some of his thoughts around this as well, because it was a suggestion, I think, that has come from some of our officers, that we start to look at sort of a wider scope. And this was one of the things that sort of came through. Matt, are you able to offer any further clarification?
I can certainly respond. I'm not necessarily guaranteeing that I'll offer further clarification. So I think, as Hazel points out, this is quite a sort of grey area. It doesn't give us more powers to scrutinise any partners that we don't currently have powers to scrutinise. I think in reshaping the committee, it's two things. It is that statement of intent that an awful lot of activity happens in the footprint of Monmouthshire, which currently is not effectively scrutinised by the elected politicians who are tasked with representing the communities and people of Monmouthshire. It doesn't give us those powers. So we haven't historically had the powers to scrutinise all public services. We still don't have those powers. But nonetheless, there is a lot of collaborative activity that happens on this footprint, and there are a lot of issues raised with you as ward representatives or ward members, where potentially sort of further information opportunities to scrutinise would be beneficial. So no, it doesn't give us more powers, but it, through this forum and working with the likes of the chief exec of the local authority, also as chair of the PSB and other reps of that public service board, to broaden that remit. And the other aspect, as Hazel touched upon, is the fact that we're increasingly seeing a lot more activity undertaken collaboratively and through different vehicles. I think we're expecting an announcement in the sort of fairly soon on the future, for example, of what are called corporate joint committees as part of the new local government and elections bill, which potentially create or could see the emergence of new delivery vehicles for certain services. Again, so what we start to see is more and more services delivered collaboratively, and this committee gives us the opportunity to keep those and make insight and make sure they don't fall between the cracks of the other select committees. But as to some of the precise nature of that, it's something we still need to work through. We don't have absolute clarity on that yet.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Petruni, you had a question?
Sorry for being late as well. I do apologise. I have read all the stuff. I obviously don't know what was been said, but you know, Matt, that my big bugbear about this committee for many years now, and this is this kind of almost feels like a unicorn. It's like we are going to work collaborative. It's coming down the line, you know. But it's been years. And then you say lots of activity, but can you give me, like, say, 2 concrete examples? And can you tell me for sure that it's having an impact, a positive one? Do you know what I mean? Where are we working together cross-collaboratively? What's the result and what's the impact?
I'd be honest, I think at the moment, in terms of where we're at with the future generation, if we think of the original purpose of this committee was to hold the Public Services Board to account for its activity. The first phase of that work was very focused on the process and mechanisms of undertaking the wellbeing assessment, so gathering the evidence, producing the plan. I think one of the challenges for that has been, as a committee topic, people have been largely scrutinising process for a period of time, because the challenges that the Public Service Board were looking at, and it's absolutely right that the Public Service Board look at, are those complex issues which don't necessarily have immediate short-term solutions that can be applied. Because if we knew exactly how to solve these complex problems, we would be doing them within our own organisation. I think some of the work we're starting to see emerge from this space, I wouldn't point to impact yet, but you can point to some of the collaborative endeavours, such as joint work on the sort of promotion of the agenda around domestic and sexual violence has been undertaken collaboratively across partners. There's been quite a bit of scrutiny. You've had involvement from a Naira and Bevan Health Board on the work of the Early Help Panel, which is really focused. It's a multi-agency partnership that's one of the PSB priorities, to ensure that families have that opportunity for early help and intervention that stops them descending into crisis. But again, in terms of outcomes, we're not going to see the impact of that for many, many years, if not generations. So those are some of the activities under the PSB. But I take the point that what we're looking at is very long-term issues, and there are not many measurable outcomes yet that have come before this committee to demonstrate real progress or impact on the ground.
Yeah, I was always under the impression, so I'm a white ribbon ambassador, there's been quite a lot of collaborative work actually on domestic violence for some years. So that's not true. It's not new. That kind of cross-Gwent collaborative. I remember we had a talk when I was first elected in the first term about how it was working across Gwent on this agenda. So I wouldn't say the PSB is, I suppose this is my point about the PSB, is I still don't get this sense of why I support it. I support the central thrust. Obviously we have to work collaboratively, but it still feels like rhetoric. It still doesn't feel like it's added anything that we weren't already doing, and doesn't feel like it's having an impact yet. And I appreciate you're right on early intervention. It could take a generation to see, but I do like to see some metrics at some point. Otherwise, we're just going to be talking about processes for the next 5 years, and we already talked about it for the last 3 or 4. I suppose, so from my perspective on the future work programme, it should be, yes, processes, yes, big issues, but, our job is to be a scrutiny panel now, and is, what are you doing? How can I judge you that you are doing something is being done to impact the people that we all serve and represent, rather than talk about another strategy? And I suppose that's what I would like to see. I want to see some meat.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair challenge, exactly the sort of challenge and question we expect to be coming out from this committee. And I know we've taken things sort of slightly out of order this morning, but we had the work programme earlier. And of course, the broader remit of this committee doesn't preclude it identifying some of those areas within the wellbeing plan and asking for reports and updates on that, so you can look at some of those metrics and hold officers, not just of Monmouthshire County Council, but to the other lead agencies, and hold them to account. So over the past sort of 12 to 15 months, this committee has had presentations from the lead agencies for the 6 areas that the Public Service Board has prioritised in its wellbeing plan. That work continues. The prioritisation will continue to change. but the steps within the wellbeing plan, the 4 wellbeing goals and the 19 steps are still there. So at any point, if this committee wants to add to its work programme, it may not be the most illuminating answer, but I'm slightly concerned that the lights have gone out on me. Yeah, so actually, yeah, the committee can add any of those to its work programme. So at any point you want to sort of focus in on one of those areas, the committee can ask any of those officers to attend. But the other aspect that we were sort of touching on earlier is the fact that there's an awful lot more that happens, or which the PSB legally discharges the duty for, which weren't coming to this committee, which is why the terms of reference have been revised and broadened, because issues such as the topic you're going to be discussing today, domestic and sexual violence, is one of those things which hasn't in recent memory had or sitting naturally with an existing committee. It's a legal responsibility of the PSB. It's not something which our members are particularly cited on through scrutiny. So what we're hoping to do with today's agenda is give you the opportunity to drill into some of that delivery to see what sits beneath the strategy.
Sorry, it's not on strong communities, domestic violence.
So the legal responsibility sits with the PSB for this. Obviously, with any topic, it's always a matter that certain topics you can draw a line to multiple select committees. Something like this is quite a cross-cutting and partnership. So it's delivered through partnership arrangements. So it doesn't necessarily sit neatly with one committee. But you're absolutely right. You can look at a lot of these topics and draw a line back to a single select committee. You know, if you were to look at, say, some of the things the PSB is delivering on around the economy, you could draw a line back to economy and development. Some of the things on early help and intervention could be children and young people. I think the difference is the legislative basis for some of this delivery is through the PSB and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is why it sort of comes to this committee. So it's those things that can otherwise fall between the cracks and are being delivered through partnership mechanisms rather than sitting solely with MCC as a deliverer.
So as an example then, Matt, where is, for example, so things like climate emergency, clear that's, you know, that's one of the things that the PSB has got some responsibilities around in terms of future generations. Where's that currently going? Also I mean, we've got the Strategic Transport Group, which is neither a select nor a formal committee of this council. They work incredibly hard. They have worked incredibly hard over the past 8 years to get transport on the agenda at all, integrated transport at all on the agenda in this council. But for example, whilst they have relationships with Network Rail and I don't know, Transport for Wales, and so, you know, where are those people held to account for the delivery, or the lack of delivery? I mean, I could not believe it yesterday when I saw that piece around potentially reintroducing the tolls on the M4. Won't go there, mind. But anyway, but for example, you know, those are things, they are partnership delivery pieces, aren't they? They are not delivered by this council alone. So where do they sit? And ought we be a bit more challenging in some of the things that we're holding to account? Because basically, you know, the people we represent, our citizens, are not seeing any improvement in public transport services. They're not seeing, you know, action taken to mitigate climate emergencies. You know, we've had all that dreadful adverse weather and the impact on this county. Where is the action around that being monitored? Is that something we ought to be bringing here? Ought we be bringing? There we are.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. It's one of those things where there could be two answers to it. I guess if we were to look back the activity and the commitment undertaken by Monmouthshire County Council, the 43 members of this council back in May declared a climate emergency and adopted a climate emergency strategy and action plan. Now, you know, so that sits on one hand within the remit of Strong Communities Select Committee. The other thing that's happened alongside that is the Public Service Board has looked at its wellbeing plan and said it's not enough to act as single agencies on this. Climate change is clearly referenced within the wellbeing assessment, and there is activity in the wellbeing plan. But Public Service Board looked at that and said, actually, in the 3 years since we began this wellbeing assessment, I think we've probably seen, and the recent floods are evidence of this, more extreme weather impacts. We've seen growing public, I suppose, public desire to see people in public life act on this sooner. And so the Public Service Board has asked officers to go away and escalate its work. NRW, Natural Resources Wales, have the lead on that for the Public Service Board and are undertaking some additional work to really ratchet up the scale and ambition across all public services. So I think that work would sit very neatly with this commission, because that's the collaborative, that's the collaborative activity.
So, for example, where are we holding to account public bodies that are now looking to build headquarters in ridiculous places like Usk with no public transport hubs, or, you know, Gwent Police are looking to put their new headquarters in a place where, you know, are we thinking about that? Because actually that is all part of, you know, climate change, climate emergency. Why are we continuing to have public bodies, you know, the Health Board new facility out at the Grange is also a point, you know, a case in point of an area which is not currently well served by public transport. So, you know, public bodies are making these decisions. You know, is the PSB holding them sufficiently to account for them? You know, in terms of, so what is the impact? What is the impact? Does this fit with the fact that we're in a climate emergency? You know, is that right? How are people, you know, so people are like, oh, all they worry about is building a bigger car park, isn't it? Well, that's what we've got to worry about here, of course, because there's no other way of getting here. No. Just saying. Anyway, but, you know, these are, I think, these are the things that I think I'm interested, you know, because it isn't just about the decisions we take here, is it? It's about the decisions that other of those public bodies who are represented on the Public Service Board take, you know, how are they helping us to serve the fact that we are in a climate emergency and we do need to take decisive action to mitigate against some of the impacts that we're all having on the environment. And then, you know, I mean, I don't know, you know, who's holding the Burns Commission to account? I mean, that is, if anything, is, you know, with rapid action, what's happening? Very little as far as I can see.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Petrini?
No comment on that. No, I suppose in terms of going back to, have we had National Resources Wales to this committee recently? Last year. Late last year?
No, because we didn't.
I wonder if it's worth us asking for them to attend again in light of the floods, given it's a recent issue, and maybe expand on the climate change stuff.
But why?
But why? Not just yeah. But maybe might be worth inviting them back again, given that climate change does actually affect most of those well-being issues. I don't know what the committee feel. If they feel it's too soon since they were last invited them, fine. But I mean, given the flooding, it might be an opportune time to bring them back in front of PSB. I don't know. Just a suggestion.
We could be asking the PSB to provide us with a paper demonstrating how they are holding all of their, you know, how they are all working together collaboratively, what work is going on, how they're holding each other to account for the decisions they're taking on matters such as climate change, you know, how does that work in the Public Service Board itself? So, you know, if we are here to scrutinise the wider public service to deliver on the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, what activity are they undertaking? So perhaps we could see that and then have bodies like Natural Resources Wales, I'm sure there are others, I can't think of them at the present time, that, you know, the drainage No, they're not the drainage board, though, are they? What are they?
God knows, there's a world of pain.
Yes, I think so. Anyway, you know, all of those organisations that are involved in delivering, well, I suppose, climate change mitigation, environmental works. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Petruni. Just to update Tudor and Dimitri, we've already discussed the scrutiny of the Regional Partnership Board, and we are looking to do some joint scrutiny with Caerphilly. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll come back and do item number 5. Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you all. So now we'll proceed to item 5, violence against women and domestic abuse and sexual abuse. We have 2 visitors here, gosh, lost my words again. Who are here to present this report. Can you just introduce yourselves, please, for those that are on the...
Oh, there you go. So I'm Janice Dent. I'm the regional advisor for the Gwent Fowler SV regional team.
I'm Mary Ryan, the corporate safeguarding lead for Newport, and Newport City Council hosts the regional Fowler SV team.
So hopefully, well, everybody's had a copy of the report. So if we just kind of go over the main points. So as you know, the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse, Sexual Violence Act Wales places a duty on all local authorities and the Health Board to publish a report on the progress made each year. So I know that the report comes to this committee at the end of each financial year. So this is just kind of an interim report. So the team has been established since 2015. It was a pathfinder region for Welsh Government, and Welsh Government used aspects of the model to kind of replicate across Wales to be able to kind of embed the process, really. So we're funded by Welsh Government, which is paid into Newport City Council to manage, but even though we're hosted by Newport, it's very much a regional team. So some of the grant funds the team, some of it funds supporting the board and the subgroup, and there's 50% funding towards the regional IDVA service. So the partnership board is comprised of members from each local authority area, each kind of health, well, only one health board in Iron Bevan, Gwent Police, the Office of the Police Commissioners, the Ambulance Service, Probation, Social Housing, Supporting People, Fire and Rescue, and the Gwent Safeguarding Board. We're also really lucky that we get a member of Welsh Government to come into the board each meeting, just to make sure that we've got that two-way process for her to feed in what's happening Welsh Government-wise, and for us to have that real conversation with her around how that might work within Gwent. So the partnership board provides the governance structure, and that's why that membership on the board is so important to us. And then the working groups make sure that identifies the strategies within the priority areas within the strategy are met, and we produce an annual delivery plan that was also part of the papers to be able to meet that. So the strategy, I know I came to talk about the strategy, so that was published in May 2018, not due to be renewed now until 2023, although Welsh Government there's a shorter time scale, so we may need to kind of revisit that as it happens. So in relation to Monmouthshire, there is representation on the board, on the strategic delivery group, on the domestic homicide group, the communication and engagement group, whole education approach group, commissioners group, training subgroup, and on the IDVA steering group. So hopefully what that means is that throughout every strategic priority and governance, there's representation from Monmouthshire to make sure that we're kind of meeting the needs of the citizens of Monmouthshire as well. So, like I said, there's 6 priority areas. There's a report, in your report rather, there's a breakdown of what's been achieved since 2015 in that. So I won't go through it because it's quite a lengthy list, but obviously if you have any questions. And we also kind of work sort of wider responsibilities. So we sit on a number of Welsh Government subgroups to be able to influence how national policy goes. We've also, as you know, been involved in the DH8PR pilot within Monmouthshire, which is kind of we're liaising with Welsh Government with to be able to kind of improve the review as a whole, the review process, and also with the Home Office. So that's been really good learning across Monmouthshire and across the whole of Gwent and wider Wales as well.
And can I just say at that point, so the Home Office have been really impressed with the engagement with Monmouthshire in the first pilot for the domestic homicide using the adult practice review methodology. We're actually in the process now of looking at a single review process for all of Wales, which the Home Office are also considering devolving some of that governance to Welsh Government instead of it remaining with Home Office. So that sort of started in Monmouthshire in terms of you being the first pilot. So thank you.
And then as a regional team, we're also working with the Gwent Safeguarding Board to look at all the other regional boards, including public service boards and the regional partnership board, to look at how we can make sure communication is better, and that we enable kind of VOWDRSV to be fully embedded within safeguarding procedures and seen as everybody's business. So that's definitely a focus moving into the next financial year. So the focus for 2020 is the action plan to meet the Welsh Government Good Practice Guidance for non-specialist Welsh public services in relation to working with adult perpetrators. We've also awaiting, there's been a draft, national indicators have been published, but we're working with Welsh Government at the moment about how they can be measured, and then obviously we'll be working with all local authorities to support you to be able to meet those requirements and report upon them every year. We're just in the process of updating the Gwent needs assessment. So I know that Maria, who's working on this, has been talking to a number of members of Monmouthshire to make sure that we've kind of got that fully embedded. And then there will be an action plan to which Sharon has been invited as well to look at actually the needs assessment is one thing, but what does that actually mean to the citizens of Gwent, and how can we make sure that there's equality across all local authority areas? We've just successfully received some additional funding for capital. We've submitted a proposal for capital funding to be able to increase the refuge type provision within Monmouthshire. So we're awaiting agreement from Welsh Government on that, so that we'll be working closely with the supporting people teams, etc., to be able to kind of support that should we get there. And we're holding 2 open days in Gwent at the end of March, because we can all sit in, and think about what might work, but actually the most important thing is engaging with citizens about what would help them and how they could be supported better across the whole of Gwent.
Yeah, so it's really, if there's any questions, and we know there's a lot of detail in the report, but that's sort of the highlights really in terms of going through where we are as a regional service. Is there anything specific anybody would like to ask?
Thank you, Janice, Mary. I will now hand over to members. Who would like to start? Councillor Taylor.
Good morning. Thank you for presenting your papers. I've got a couple of questions. So I've got a few, so I'll probably come back to you. What I couldn't really take from the report, so there's an awful lot of, in terms of the action plan, are very much just progress on actions. What I couldn't discern from the report at all, in fact, was impact or outcomes. So what I don't know as an elected member here in Monmouthshire is whether people who are in circumstances where they're suffering domestic abuse or sexual violence are in any better position as a result of the work that the board and so on and so forth are doing. So first of all, I wondered if you could help me with that, because there isn't any, I mean, I can't see any outcomes at all. In fact, the outcomes or the progress are not outcomes at all. They're just very process. So what I can see from your report is there's a whole lot of process, but I can't tell anything about outcomes. So that's my first question. Sorry, just hold those thoughts. You mentioned in your presentation the matter of equality of, I presume, of what I wanted to know just for the present time, and I'll come back after. Equality of what? So what does that mean? And actually, it would be really helpful to unpick that, and I'll come back later after other members with a few more questions, if I may, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, if we look at the outcomes first, so we're in the process at the moment of updating the needs assessment, as I said. One of the things that's really key about our needs assessment this year is to look at progress between 2015 and now. So all of those outcome measures will be in there. So it's things like reports to police, how many people have been supported, how many refuge spaces do we have. So all of that detail, unfortunately, is in the needs assessment, which is due to be completed by the end of the financial year. And also we're waiting for, like I said, the national indicators from Welsh Government. So that is a suite of outcomes which every local authority will be required to report upon. But we haven't got those yet. So we're very much looking at the annual delivery plan rather than necessarily overarching objectives.
I suppose also, excuse me, adding to that, so the regional IDVA service, they have a whole reporting mechanism in terms of how many people have access, and obviously it's the high risk victims, predominantly female, but with male victims also, who have accessed the service across Gwent. So there is a whole load of data in there as well that will be available and will tie in with the end of year report.
The other thing that's happening is we attend the Safer Monmouthshire meeting, so we're working with Andrew Mason and members at the moment to work out actually what specific measures and outcomes do Monmouthshire want, because every local authority asks for something slightly different. So we're working on data sets and a benchmark to be able to properly measure moving forward.
Sorry, so to be clear then, we don't have any data to tell us what the difference is. So data, but not just data. So yes, of course, I'd like to see data. I'd like to know, for example, how many police reports there were in 2015 and how many there are now. But also, where is the qualitative information? So how can we tell that what the Partnership Board is discharging is helpful if we don't have any information about any qualitative or even, you know, quantum information about the services that are being provided? I'm not sure, Chair, just, you know, to be really clear, how we could scrutinise this on the basis of what we have in front of us. I think it's insufficient for our purposes. Sorry, use the word IDVA. It'd be helpful, perhaps, for members if we don't use acronyms, if we can help it. But then, if that facility exists, why haven't we got that data here, and what does it look like?
I think some of that is around timing, so we're not at the end of the financial year yet, so it's really difficult to look back. But as soon as they're coming through, I know that some of the membership are sitting on the Independent Domestic Violence Advocacy Group as an example, so they're looking at the data and the report that goes behind that. So it is kind of, I guess, we're in the position at the moment, which isn't helpful, and I do apologise, of trying to understand where the benchmark is, where have we got to, but most importantly, what do members really want moving forward? And that's the basis of the needs assessment work and the work that we're doing with Safer Monmouthshire. Like I said, every local authority is different, and the Welsh Government reporting procedures, until the national indicators are fully accepted, don't give us that kind of steer as yet. So yes, you're right, we don't have anything as yet, but it's something that we're working towards.
Just one more point then. I mean, with respect, you know, this has been the case for like 4 or 5 years now. So are we saying we don't have any data? We don't have a baseline for 2015, 16? We don't have any baseline? You're saying you're working on data now. Are we saying then we don't have any baseline, so we don't know what things look like in 2015? That's the... I guess that's the first thing. And I know you said that we're looking at a suite of measures and what information would be helpful to members. But actually, you know, and you said the authorities are different, but people are not different. You know, people are not different, and in those circumstances need, you know, tailored support. So I don't have any confidence that I know any more than I did before, but thank you.
That's okay. No, the needs assessment was completed in 2015-16, so that's our benchmark. So the needs assessment that we're redoing at the moment will identifies the difference between 2016 and now. So this is renewed every 3 years, so this is the process that we're in now. So impact-wise, we've obviously worked lots with services around how people have felt around the service that they've received. We've consulted with kind of frontline members and citizens around how actually, because we can think that there's services available, but particularly our male support group as an example, they didn't know that those services were necessarily available to men. So all of that consultation is being fed into the needs assessment. So you're right, as in we can't look at it as yet, but as soon as kind of the financial year is finished, we've got the benchmark from 15-16, and then the updated will give us much more of an idea of how we've progressed within the last 3 years.
Thank you. Obviously, I struggled with this because obviously your priorities, you know, you've put some great work that you've come up with, but surely we could have had data to look at what happened in 2019 to previous, because it's a little bit difficult to scrutinise and see how successful this is going forward. So I think Councillor Taylor raised a valid point there. Are there any other members with questions? Councillor Petruni.
Yeah. So just so I've got that in my, I've got a small little brain, so you have to stick with me on this one. We have a strategy that's not informed by data.
The strategy was informed by the needs assessment that was completed in 15-16. So what we're looking at with the updated needs assessment is actually what impact has the strategy had.
Yeah. But I have in front of me the new one as well. That's part of the agenda pack, right?
No, the new strategy.
The new priorities and what they would look like and when we expect them to be delivered by May 2020, for example. The 2021 plan. So we've got a plan that hasn't been informed by data.
No, yes, only because of the Welsh Government timing. So that plan has had to go into Welsh Government by February to be able to kind of see whether we would be funded for another year. On the caveat that this could well be changed based on the results of the needs assessment.
So we're looking at a plan that could radically change.
It won't radically change because the strategic priorities will be the same. But it's just around those specifics that the Gwent Needs Action Plan that's being developed by board members and SDG members in April will be able to feed into that process.
Yeah, no, I sorry. What I'm trying to I wonder if you could feed back that timeline needs to be changed. Yeah. Okay, so we need the data to drive the strategy, not the strategy then to be in front of us that could or might not change, but we have no idea. And so surely some of the feedback processes actually we need the needs assessment first. That will inform the strategy. And I think we need to move on from that basis, and then we avoid all these questions. Does that make, yeah, you know, that I think if you could feed that back, I think that would be really grateful. I think for you as well, actually, and justifying why there's certain priorities, because now I'm looking at the new priorities for the 2021 plan, and I'm sort of left unclear as to how things will be, how I would track it, you know. And I'm not a very bright man, so I appreciate that. It could be beyond my comprehension. But for example, things like further develop the Gwent Commissioners Group to enable shared plans and decisions as identified in the agreed principles and strategy. Quarter 1, Quarter 2, Quarter 3, Quarter 4. How would I hold you to account for that? How would I judge further develop?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we can definitely look at the wording in the plan to make sure that it meets those requirements. I think what happens, unfortunately, at the moment, and that's what we're trying to change, is each group has their own action plan. So we're trying to move it into, which is why the plan, the overarching plan looks a bit kind of woolly, but I can understand that's not at all helpful. So we can definitely change that moving into 2021. And just thank you for your feedback, really.
Yeah, no, I suppose we're trying to, it sounds a bit of kind of a tense tone, but I don't mean it in that sense. It's just the frustration in that it all ties in with the data, doesn't it, really? Because then if you link the key actions to the data, then even if the data is qualitative, as Councillor Taylor says, then it's easier to scrutinise and hold the relevant people to account for the relevant actions. I think just helps everyone, and then we can identify who are the people not fulfilling what they need to do. And I think that it all just needs to be cleaned up, I think, and then the timeline needs to be cleaned up. So I appreciate that. If you could clear out some of that wording. I mean, I might have missed it. I've looked and looked. I'm sure I've missed it. Where do we where's the measurements for victims? How many victims we help within Monmouthshire? You know, how many do we rehouse? You know, like salt of the earth kind of data that really means a lot. For example, and I've said this to councillors, so sorry if you've heard me repeat this, but when I first got elected, I came across a case. It started out being a council tax case where someone wasn't paying the council tax, basically. I'm not going to say too much details, but it was that issue. It transpires it was a DV incident that it was the council tax payment was a symptom, not the cause, but it took a kind of disclosure to someone she didn't really know, me, to highlight in the system. The system wasn't asking. The system was just saying, give us the money, give us the money, give us the money. There was no questions of why is this arising? Why? Is there an issue? It could have been another issue. It could have been financial reasons, it could have been loss of an employment, whatever it was. And I've just, for me as a member, how can I be confident the systems are there within council and the wider board, picking up that kind of ground level stuff that actually means things to people and to our residents who are experiencing this horrific. Because, you know, and I know you know this, but systems are off-putting for a lot of people, and they avoid systems. And my limited experience of meeting DV victims is they're terrified of systems, and that's the subject of control as well, where they, you know, people don't want them to access systems or get the support they need. And I just wondering, I just don't get the sense we're doing that. You know, these centres are sensitive enough, because that's what it's about being sensitive enough to ask well, is there something else going on here that we need to be cautious of? And I just want to see a report. You know what I mean? I know I don't live in a utopian world. I know there's no perfect system, but I want to see a strategy that says, right, we have sensitive systems that will pick up victims frontline. These are how many we picked up, and we estimate this is 20% of the total number, given we know how many nationally. I mean, this is all data we can do, right? What more can we do to finally tune our systems to pick up more of this? What best practice are we seeing in England or wherever? I don't really care. France, New Zealand, wherever it works, basically. I just don't get that sense.
Okay. Can I just say, in terms of the so there's the whole national training framework.
Sorry to interrupt. Just quickly, there wasn't a response to France's question on equality.
Okay, they're kind of together, if I can. So
Okay,
apologies for misunderstanding the brief, I guess, is the kind of first step. I actually wrote a report which went to Seafield Monmouthshire recently, which contains all of that information. And if I'd kind of understood the brief a bit better, then, you know, my fault, I would have made sure that that was included within that. So that will hopefully give members much more of a kind of an idea of that qualitative and quantitative data, and also around kind of the needs assessment and the equality around actually what services do we have available across Gwent. So as a regional team, we're obviously looking across the whole region, and one of those reasons was the capital funding was what we saw was we didn't have any of this specific provision within Monmouthshire for dispersed units. So that's why we've gone down that project. So I can apologise. The evidence is there. The only thing I can apologise for is not completely understanding and bringing that with me. But bearing in mind that obviously not all of it is completed as yet, but that will address hopefully all of those issues. So I'm not sure how it works, but if you would like us to return to kind of present that once it's ready, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Sorry, can I just ask, so just in terms of your other question regarding sort of what's Monmouth, how do you know Monmouth are doing what Monmouth need to be doing? So there is the National Training Framework, and that puts duties on all responsible, you know, councils and health board and whatever, in terms of our numbers of Ask and Act mandatory training for everybody, whether you're working, you know, cleaning the streets or in social care, it doesn't matter. But actually, it'd probably be helpful for you to have that data in terms of how Monmouth are doing on that each year as well, in terms of, because there may be specific areas that you need to think about, you know, this area isn't addressing that. So, yeah, but we can make sure that's included. Yeah.
Whilst Councillor Taylor's just dealing with her phone, can we go back to equality?
Yeah, So the equality was the issue that I talked about with the dispersed units. So kind of trying to look across Gwent at where are the gaps. And as we know, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you live, and often it doesn't mean that if you live in Monmouthshire, you want to access refuge within Monmouthshire, you'd much prefer to be, or it's much safer for you to be in a different county. So it's kind of looking at that aspect. So that's the dispersed unit element. There's just one example of where we've tried to make sure that across Gwent, if you were a victim of Vowdress across the whole, that you could access the appropriate support.
Sorry, a detailed question then on the report, or the first report around what has happened. Accepting all the points you've just raised about data and that you'll come back, that'd be great. So the pilot project around increasing awareness among children and young people, and I think that is the preventative aspect of the work, isn't it? 3 Monmouthshire schools, only 3 receive. Could we have that upped? Because 3's great, and 3 will make some difference, but if obviously the more schools, the more year 9s, particularly young women, get that kind of training about healthy relationships at that age, I think that will be really, really useful. Can you explain why only 3?
Yeah, so this is when we need member support, really. So we were working with the education safeguarding lead on this specific project. So it was only a project for this year for additional funding with Welsh Government. We wrote out to every educational safeguarding lead within Gwent, asking for volunteers. And unfortunately, it was only 3 schools within Monmouthshire that actually took us up on that. Only 3, yeah. And there was unfortunately, it was very last minute that even 3, because up until the day before the training, we only had 1. So it is about, again, that support around actually if you knew this was happening, what support could you provide to help that as well. So yeah, but that's why there were only 3.
Fair enough. Is there stuff around primaries, or is it still seen as too young?
I'm not an expert on the new curriculum, but obviously the new curriculum will be really helpful in that aspect. Spectrum are also funded by Welsh Government to deliver training in primary schools as well. And that's another kind of report that we unfortunately have, that we haven't shared. But they work across the whole of Wales. So numbers are limited, but it's definitely something. So the pilot project that we mentioned in the report has developed a suite of learning that we're hoping, because the funding obviously comes to an end at the end of this month, but what we're hoping is we can use that training pack to be able to disseminate to as many schools as possible. So it might need changing around primary, but the aim is that it now gets disseminated out.
Sorry, Chair, I'm taking your indulgence. So how can we help you? You asked for our help. What do you want from us?
Sorry, it's just about if we maintain kind of this kind of process, but just working with educational members to understand that actually we do need some support to be able to roll this out. We can't just kind of knock on the school door. So that kind of point of contact, I guess, is the most important thing. Brilliant.
But I'm Tudor Thomas. I'm chair of Children and Young People. I'm also vice chair of corporate parenting. So, I obviously see it in broad spectrum. And I agree with Councillor Betruni there. I'm disappointed that only 3 schools came forward, obviously 4 comprehensives in Monmouthshire. I'm a councillor in Abergavenny, and certainly my perception is that domestic violence isn't decreasing, it's increasing. And certainly from experience on CYP and particularly corporate parenting, obviously early intervention is so important. And particularly when you look at very young children who are extremely vulnerable in terms of violence within the home and having adverse childhood experiences which will go on to affect them for the rest of their lives. And whilst I fully support having strategies, etc., really it's, what I want to see is more engagement from a school perspective, and I will sort of raise that, and at primary school as much as secondary. My wife was a foundation phase teacher, and she saw it at the sharp end of children coming into school from very disjointed, violent backgrounds, where school was a haven of safety. And where, Mrs. Thomas or whoever's teaching them, that is their sort of rock for that day. Personally, I am very interested in this, and I will certainly encourage schools to take part. I think they're a crucial link. They're the ones who see probably more than, say, a street cleaner when a child comes in who's disengaged, who's disorientated because there's been a major fracas at home that morning, and where there might have been violence that morning, and then they come into school and they're expected to do their maths and English and science, or in secondary, French and chemistry and so on. They're not really in a fit state to undertake learning. So I certainly will push that.
Just to add to Tudor's comments there, we're about to embark on some work tackling racism within schools. I think Strong Communities and CYP could do some work around this as well, because the younger the children are, the more honest they are. I can remember way back when I was in primary school, we had a conversation with the teacher, and the amount of comments that were coming from children and what they were witnessing in homes. So I'm sorry, I want to go in a little bit more detail. Can you give me a better understanding on how this spectrum sessions work?
Yeah, I haven't got it with me, so it's they're tailored to each individual year. So, from very light touch to kind of moving up to comp and being a bit more progressive. So again, what I can do is send a supplementary report of which schools in Monmouthshire have received that training and how many children, etc. So we can definitely look at that. But it's supported by a couple of other programmes as well, which Mary's going to...
Yeah. So the other programme is Operation Encompass, which is rolled out across Gwent. So in terms of a domestic incident that's happened at night or out of school hours where police have attended, we've now got a system in place where each school is notified prior to the child coming into school. So that's direct from police to all the individual schools, and that's whether it's primary or secondary school. So they're aware. So if Johnny turns up without his homework or whatever, they're aware that there's more of a welfare and more of a care and support issue for that child that day as opposed to anything else.
So is that work being done within 1CC?
It's a Gwent Police
It's
project.
a Gwent Police project, so it's Gwent Police direct to all the schools. And again, there's an awful lot of data on that we can share. In terms of how many calls at night for Monmouthshire. We've got it for the whole region, but obviously we can share the specific details for Monmouthshire if that would be helpful.
Is there any reason why this wouldn't have been delivered within this report to give us that insight?
Just my understanding of the brief, really. Yeah. So and that kind of, because I'm conscious that data is in the end of year annual reports. I didn't put any data in this report, which obviously in hindsight was a mistake, but definitely be kind of resolved within the annual report to all PSBs.
Could I ask Council to maybe consider in terms of the time when we come here? So if we come after the sort of the end of the financial year when all that report data is available, would that be more helpful in the future?
I think we'd all welcome that very much. Yeah.
The timing.
Yeah.
Councillor Taylor?
Sorry. It would be very helpful, I think, to have the detail about these services, because anecdotally, one hears reports that perhaps Operation Encompass, might not be working as efficiently as one would wish, in terms of the situation you just described. So I think it would be really helpful for us to have that information. And I think what we also need, in addition to some of those figures to demonstrate what is happening locally, is really an understanding of what does the path look like for someone in those circumstances. I had the great fortune to hear a survivor speak at a Safe Lives event, and she was relating an experience which was in Gwent, and it was very recent, so I don't know that it was in Monmouthshire at all, but I do know that it was in Gwent. And the situation she described in terms of the response from housing providers, not at all understanding the safeguarding and risk and harm that she was potentially exposed to, the response of education to applying for school places in a particular way, or, you know, with particular requirements because of that risk and potential harm. And so my concern is, if I'm entirely honest, at the present time, you know, we're unsighted, and I know you've said that we can see some of that. But what I don't know, you know, when we talk about the board and you described all the people on it, one would imagine that should be exceptionally smooth. When I listened to this woman's experience, it could have been that she was relating an experience that might have happened in the 70s, not today. And so that is my concern. And until I think we're sighted on that, I'm not sure that we can have confidence that actually things are really different, and that a person coming through these services, we could take confidence. Not, you know, we don't want people we don't want people to have an experience which is then almost as traumatic as the abuse that they have suffered in the first instance, because the description she gave for her and her children was that it was almost as traumatic, and did lead to very, very significant mental health issues. And so that is my concern. And I guess I would say, would request two things, that we give consideration to two things, and that is, we do receive this information back in the appropriate form, whether that is here or to one of our select committees. But we also do recommend to the PSB that they need to be very much scrutinising the detail of what each of the partners is doing in terms of their own individual delivery. Because it would seem to me that if, you know, the PSB has got oversight of, you know, this function, then they wouldn't seem to be that as well sighted perhaps as they need to be in terms of some of these matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I probably should have asked this question at the beginning. The regional team, what are you responsible for? Because obviously we spoke a lot about the stuff that we're doing within Monmouthshire at present, but what is your role?
This is something that we're kind of revisiting at the moment with everyone, because I think what happened was Rebecca did a lot of work when the team first set up, but obviously people change. So we're kind of working on some kind of briefing to kind of not energize, that's the wrong word, but refine and share. But the main reason, I guess, for the regional team is to support the activities of the board, and then their members to ensure that they're meeting their requirements under the Act. So it's very much a guidance, advice, and kind of supporting type role, rather than a action team, I guess, is the other way of describing it. So it's very much that kind of being able to have that oversight from across Gwent, being responsible for the needs assessment, and being responsible for pointing people to the right place sometimes, so that pathfinding and kind of role. So, you know, in particular, we would with Monmouthshire working on the data. A lot of the data that people are asking for is Monmouthshire data. So it is about kind of, you know, supporting people, teams, being able to report in that data, etc. So it's about recognising where does that exist, and then supporting the appropriate people to be able to access it and understand it. But there's always, because the legislation is quite new, there's also, in the most recent kind of 12 months, there's been 3 different sets of guidance issued by Welsh Government as well. So it's about kind of working with all members to make sure that they're aware of what that is and what the requirements are, and supporting mechanisms to be able to report against those. So yeah, that's the kind of role in in a nutshell, I guess.
Dimitri says he's slow. I'm slower. So whilst we're doing that, what is happening to individuals who are out there experiencing what is going on?
Okay, so all of this is away from the day job, if that. So the work that we're doing is still continuing. So the services are still working. The services work together. So we have specialist sector meetings to be able to look at any issues that are coming through, any best practice, sharing that best practice across organisations. We're looking at kind of where the gaps are, so that, as an example, do we have any duplication of services? So that some of that funding could be rearranged where the gaps are. So all of that work is carried out by the specialist service. The National Training Framework is that really key responsibility to make sure that everybody that comes into contact with somebody who may be experiencing VOWD or SV has an appropriate response. So we report upon kind of how many people per local authority, etc., have been trained, and working closely with each workforce development team within local authorities to look at, again, where those gaps are. So in relation to education, only because we've just touched on it, we've fed back to Welsh Government on numerous occasions about the difficulty that teachers and school staff are having in accessing the training. So they're now going to be putting the training on the hub, which is the kind of education framework. So to be able to hopefully help that response. But I guess we're kind of looking as the umbrella, but the services and the actual support is still really strong within Gwed. We're really lucky in Gwed and in Monmouthshire. You know, Llamau and Cabanol are both excellent service providers that are kind of continually doing that work. And we're all working with citizens that don't access services around raising that awareness, because most people, particularly our male group as an example, didn't even recognise that they were in an abusive relationship. So working with those children, working with other people to make sure that we're raising that awareness and allowing that pathfinder kind of, where do I go? Okay, so I've just realised I might be in an abusive relationship. So we've recently designed a brochure that kind of gives an example of, you know, are you struggling? Is this an issue? And it directs us to the directory of services that are available by local authority area. So that's just gone out to all health boards, community centres, etc. So you know, it's about raising that awareness, but we know that we know we've got really strong services across the board.
Just for my reassurance, we are obtaining data. We do know who it affects and who's been impacted, but we just haven't got that today. But you will forward that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. The lack of data means that we are unsighted on what's happening in Monmouthshire, unfortunately. But from your knowledge, can you tell us what the major issues that are present in Monmouthshire at the moment?
Yeah, so we've got some of the little bits of findings from the needs assessment specific to Monmouthshire as of now. So the priorities moving forward is kind of, you know, one of the some consistent priorities, so things like no recourse to public funds as an example, which has an impact on people being able to access refuge and support. So some of that is around BME communities, refugee communities, migrant communities, but also around people in work, in employment that wouldn't always be kind of eligible for housing benefit. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just putting it to you.
Okay, so we're working with Monmouthshire on that. We're also working with the project around the dispersed units that can be used as move-in and move-out type refuge, so a step down to refuge, or for, so a gap again in Monmouthshire is around people with teenage sons as an example, because you can't access refuge if you've got children, boys over 16. So that kind of process is being built in now to hopefully be able to remedy that. So that's another issue across Monmouthshire. Helen, who's in the team, is doing some work around young farmers as well. And we know from research that rural communities are often more isolated in relation to talking to somebody about being in an abusive relationship or being open to abuse. So we're just starting to do some working with young farmers around trying to kind of get into that community and share the message. So all of those, they're kind of, they're widespread, but they are very specific to Monmouthshire as well because of the layout of the county, really. But all of that is kind of being able to done. So we're working with Housing First about how they allocate how many people are walking through the door that have got domestic abuse as one of their markers, and where are they going, where are the gaps, etc. So
Thank you very much for that. It's useful to know. And you've definitely identified there's a difference between the rural and the towns there, which is something I was interested to know about. Thank you.
Councillor Petrini?
Yeah, it was just, you said something and I've forgotten, but it triggered the thought around, I've always had an issue around how it's labelled domestic violence, because it implies it has to be a physical incident. And your plans already talk about mental health or resilience around mental health well-being and things like that, and where, as you guys know, domestic violence cannot be completely non-physical, but can be completely controlling in terms of behaviour, in terms of financial control, which can be also almost as limiting and isolating. You talked about one of your jobs is the mechanisms to monitor or review mechanisms which pick that up. What mechanism would pick that up?
So if I said domestic violence, that was a mistake. The legislation is very clear there is domestic abuse. So apologies if I used the wrong terminology. We're working at the moment on a steering group around IRIS for GPs and also the Ask-and-Act training. So often people will go to the GP and say they've got a bad back or they've got depression, mental health issues. But we're kind of working in that area through the NTF and through the possibility of IRIS. We're working very closely with Aneurin Bevan to actually work out, GPs are often the best people, and teachers, but the best people to have those conversations with. So it feels like sometimes that I'm saying the same thing, but we have got a lot of work to do, so there's some really good areas of practice, and unfortunately we haven't reached every area yet. So it is about some of the plans for next year will be new, but some of them are just making sure that they're more wide-reaching, just to make sure that nobody has the same experience that person had, unfortunately. There is a meeting next week with Connect Gwent and all service providers around referral pathways, because I think, what we've heard from citizens, and this is from Monmouthshire as well as all the other counties, is that either they receive no service or they receive numerous phone calls, which again re-traumatise. If they have to tell kind of 3 agencies the same story, living that again is horrific for people and has a huge impact on their mental health. So we're kind of we're hoping to be able to agree that next week, that as far as police referrals especially, that there's a clear pathway of who's going to contact them by when, with very limited kind of time spans that we will be monitoring then and feeding back on.
Okay, are there any more questions from members on this item? Okay, Councillor Traherne?
You said that your funding is coming to an end this month. Have you got funding for next year? If not, where will you get your funding from, please?
Okay, sorry, the funding that's coming to an end was the education healthy relationship funding. Our funding is only annual from Welsh Government. So the plan that you've got in front of you is the plan that's gone to Welsh Government to hopefully receive funding for 2021. They've given us an indicative agreement that we will have the funding, but it's very much based on the action plan. So we're just waiting to hear. But to be honest, we didn't hear until August last year that we had the funding for 1920. So we're just going on the basis that we will get that funding.
Okay. Obviously, we used to have a domestic violence coordinator. Tell me if I'm wrong. Sitting here today and listening, I think there's still a requirement for that. You're overseeing as the umbrella, as you say, but surely that coordinator role would still be required to ensure that is all happening?
I think the Act actually makes it more encompassing, so it's not just one person's role, actually. It's within the whole council to take on the Voucher SV legislation and Act. So whether you're part of housing or education or social care, or it's like everybody's responsibility. How individual local authorities and members of the partnership want to do that, that's obviously entirely up to yourselves.
I think it just goes back to what Councillor Francis Taylor was saying. Each of the partnerships communicating with one another isn't happening. So things are getting lost in translation. People are having to reiterate themselves, explain their situation, which can be traumatising. Whereas I suppose if you've got that central person or team communicating with all of those.
I think, to be honest though, that's the domestic abuse coordinator wouldn't be somebody that everybody would go to. It was very much about the data, which we didn't bring with us, but we can still do. I think the important thing that we need to do is make sure that everybody knows that pathway, so, and that is communicated as widely as possible. So it wouldn't, I mean, it's unrealistic to think that you could have one person that everybody was experiencing Voucher SV.
What's coming in.
Yeah, exactly.
Everywhere.
And I think that's one of the roles of Safer Monmouthshire Group. So it is just about kind of, like you said, identifying who does what and how can we make sure that that's smoother and informs councillors much better on the situation in each area rather than as a wide process.
Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, just a comment really. It does concern me sometimes in committee meetings when people talk about, you know, multidisciplinary approach. And, you know, so often communication, sometimes information drops between the cracks, doesn't it? You know, somebody's off ill or, you know, on maternity or whatever. And then something happens, and I say it's this thing of communication, that information is passing, you know, back and forth. And obviously it is highly sensitive information. It also concerns me as well that in Monmouthshire, and, you know, I taught a long time ago, but sometimes it seemed to me as a practicing teacher, I remember one case of domestic abuse, and the father was very high up in Welsh Water, and it was much more difficult to actually break into that because he had the wherewithal and the skills to, as it were, defend himself and cover it up, whereas sometimes people in more sort of, for want of a word, ordinary jobs wouldn't have those skills. I mean, you know, we did get there in the end, but it was very challenging, and I think sometimes people can be overfaced by the sort of stories that people can come up with if they're adept at doing that. So, you know, but the multidisciplinary issue, it does concern me quite a bit.
I'll just finish off with one thing, just to, on that basis, the perpetrator good practice for everybody in public services will hopefully really help in that aspect. So we've got the national framework, we've got Ask and Act in relation to victims, but as we all know, that's only one side of the story. So we're really, the Welsh Government are really keen, and they've got a number of task groups to look at perpetrator journeys and where we can intervene early again and identify those unhealthy kind of relationships and attitudes before they become perpetration. So there's lots of work happening around that going into next year as well. So hopefully that will help.
Councillor Taylor?
No, just... No.
My mic, thank you, Councillor Petrini. Obviously, Councillor Francis and Councillor Petrini raised a point with regards to the needs first assessment being first. Is a bit like shutting the stable door after the horse had bolted a little bit. We'd welcome you to come back once you have some data. It's been quite difficult to scrutinise today. We can see, obviously, there's lots of good key points and work that you're trying to do, but unless we've got something that we can look at and work with and see how effective and the impact is having, it seems a bit pointless, so to say. You said about the report to Safer Mon, if we could have a copy of that, the Spectrum report, if we could have sight of that, and the Encompass.
On the NTF, would that be helpful to know how many people have been?
Absolutely. And obviously, like I said, you know, and to further France's comment with communication between the partnership. With regards to the funding from Welsh Government, when will you get confirmation of that decision? For the when will that be?
Hopefully soon. So the closing date was the 14th of February.
Okay.
So we're just literally just waiting for Welsh Government to say yes.
Right, okay. Well, thank you all for the... Councillor Taylor.
Just one thing, Chair, sorry, are we just want to clarify our recommendations?
Mike, should we discuss sort of what we want from the PSB a bit now?
I suppose it builds on my point I made, I don't know how long ago, maybe an hour ago, on the generic theme is it's good to hear there is data and we're going to look at it, so that's fantastic. I suppose is how the PSB will, you know, their reaction to that data and what their action points will be from that needs assessment as well. So we've seen what you're going to do, and that's great, and holding the regional board to account. Almost that's what you do and advise, but the PSB is what citation of that evidence base do they have, and what action plans they already have in place or will put in place to enact on the data they see. I'm very old school. Let the data lead you to where you need to go with your actions, and so if we're weak in one area, then we need to focus in that area, and so on. So I suppose what I want from the PSB is they've seen it and they're going to tell us what they're going to do about it. In blunt, ordinary terms.
Sir Taylor?
Yeah, just to clarify, I think we should kind of feed back to the PSB on what our scrutiny today has I would suggest that we agreed to recommend that they effectively more closely monitor it to look at what are the improvements in outcomes for as a result of, there's clearly, no one could doubt, there's a lot of activity. But activity, as we all know, does not always guarantee improved outcomes. So I think we should, go back to the PSB and say, well, what are you doing to ensure that there are improved outcomes for citizens? Because at the present time, we can't follow that trail. We can't the evidence trail is not clear. So I think we should ask the PSB, to also come back to us with their assessment of progress on outcomes for members of the public. And secondly, I think Councillor Dimmock mentioned bringing in particular the matter of healthy relationships along with some other work that they're already doing in Strong Communities Select and the CYP Select. So potentially bringing that healthy relationships piece of work back to those select committees, potentially to do something joint. And I certainly would like to ask the Adult Select Committee that we see something on what the pathway and responses look like in Monmouthshire. that we can have confidence that should someone in our community need to use these services, that we understand what that pathway looks like, and we can be assured that the response from service providers providing those essential services like housing, education, etc., is as it ought to be, and is sensitive to the needs of victims and survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, healthy relationships, we want coming back to strong communities and CYP. Would that be joint? That'll be a joint meeting. Francis would like to look at what the journey looks like for residents or victims of this going into Adult Select. And Councillor Petruni wants to know what the PSB are going to do. What are the outcomes going to be for members of the public? Yes? Okay.
I just don't want another strategy with no action points.
No action points, absolutely, yeah. Okay, can I just ask members, I want to do a debrief at the end of this meeting, so I'm going to let our visitors go, and thank you both very much for attending today. So, Councillor Trahan, did you have a question?